Testing, testing. Happens a lot. I had one.
Chatty.
All right, in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act of 1975, adequate notice this meeting has been provided. Should any member of this board have reason to believe this meeting is being held in violation of that act, they should so state at this time. Hearing none, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance to the left.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Becerra?
Here?
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Belasco?
Here.
Mr. Crowley? Mr. Gorgone?
Here.
Mayor Mullick?
Here.
Mrs. Reed?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Sheehan?
Here.
Mr. Lundholm?
Here.
Mr. Malloy?
Here.
Mr. Paducis? Thank you.
Gary called me today and said he had a medical test to take in Philadelphia, so he won't be here tonight. So everybody should put their microphones on so that it can be you can be recorded. First item on the agenda is the minutes of November 7th meeting for approval. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Bob.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Gorgone, seconded by Mr. Belasco. Mr. Belasco?
Yes.
Mr. Gorgone?
Yes.
Mayor Mullick?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Sheehan?
Abstain?
Mrs. Reed?
Yes.
Mr. Crowley? Yes. Mr. Lundholm?
Abstain.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Becerra?
Yes.
Thank you.
And we have the resolution of 12-13, 409 Elmira LLC for approval. Any corrections to the resolution? Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Belasco, seconded by Mr. Jones. Mr. Lundholm?
Abstain.
Mr. Crowley?
No.
Mrs. Reed?
Yes.
If you voted no on the application,
You have to vote
basically should be
no.
abstaining.
Just abstain.
Okay.
Abstain, yes.
How about absentee?
Can't vote on it.
Can't vote.
Okay.
Okay, may I ask Mrs. Reed your vote?
No.
She abstained.
No? Okay. Deputy Mayor Sheehan?
Abstain?
Mayor Mullick?
Abstain.
Mr. Gorgone?
Yes.
Mr. Belasco?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Becerra?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the item on the agenda tonight is master plan consistency review of the reintroduced ordinance 485-2022, ordinance amending section 525 of the City Cape May Code providing minimum stormwater management and grading requirements in the City of Cape May and regulation of nuisance causing conditions. As everybody knows, this was introduced last meeting, and a lot of questions were raised about the ordinance. And I believe Craig went back to city solicitor, and he tweaked it a little bit.
Yeah, so what I did is I let the city solicitor know what your comments were, what your concerns were, and there were revisions that were made, and that's the reintroduced ordinance number 485-2022. So the change that were incorporated this, there was, if you recall, last time we discussed it, there was a lack of limiting threshold as to when this ordinance would trigger. So it was essentially anything, any development would trigger this. Under subsection A, the purpose and scope was revised to include The minimum requirements for stormwater management and grading set forth in this section shall apply to development within the city of Cape May that falls within any of the following categories, and there's 3 sections, subsections. 1, additions to any existing structure and/or site improvements which increase the impervious coverage by more than 200 square feet, or any application requiring a variance for impervious coverage or lot coverage, or 2, the construction of any pool or accessory garage structure, or 3, the construction of a new principal structure. So those were the changes. With regards to the master plan consistency review, so you found that it was consistent last time, and my memorandum of December 7th, 2022 incorporates all of the instances in the master plan that demonstrates consistency with this proposed ordinance. It was consistent with the resiliency element recommendations, the coastal vulnerability assessment recommendations found in the resiliency element, as well as the overall interpretation and purpose of the zone plan. So those were the reasons that we found that it was consistent with the master plan last time. I don't think that those modifications to the ordinance change that. And like last time, you're allowed to discuss the language that's in there and make recommendations to the governing body. So you can do 2 things. 1, determination that it's consistent with the master plan, and 2, you're allowed to make recommendations or recommend changes within the language. Okay? Any questions? And I'll let,
Yes.
I do.
oh, and they don't have to be directed at me, I mean, so,
Yeah, but it's just on the coming up with 200 square feet, to me is, I don't know of any engineering basis for 200 square feet, because if you add 200 square feet to a structure that's on a 10,000 square foot lot, or 200 square feet on a structure that's on a 5,000 square foot lot, you have 2 completely different conditions there. I just feel it's somewhat arbitrary, having it as a square footage, and I don't know if there's another way, or if there are other best practices that might have been applied in other communities elsewhere that could give you either a percentage or something. I mean, I understand, if you're going for a variance for lot coverage, for area of your house and floor area, rather, for those things, to me, it should be triggered for that type of a thing. But you also have circumstances, you have an existing footprint, and you make changes to the structure on that footprint. You're not making any changes, and you don't necessarily have to come in for any variance. However, you could create a scenario where your roof area, you go from even in my circumstance, go from a rancher to a Cape Cod, and I'm almost doubling the roof area and changing the pitch of the roof significantly, so you're going to increase the runoff, you're going to increase, like I say, the overall square footage of the roof. I just feel that there should be some other way of triggering this.
Well, I think the threshold question is, does this ordinance require stormwater retention once you hit that threshold for the entire site, or for that addition that's being put on the property?
Yeah.
And
That's another
I did
aspect.
calculations for all the members. I can tell you how many square feet you have on your lot and some other stuff, but I think we have to see ask what our goal is. I would imagine from Lou and Zach that the comments you've been getting, from what I gather, are mostly new houses being torn down, new houses being built, and no consideration for runoff to the neighbors. That's a lot different than somebody putting a garage in or putting in a driveway. And now, I don't think somebody who's doing a certain amount, again, how do you get to that threshold, should have to spend thousands of dollars on a drainage system if they're just putting a garage in and the rest of the house is already there. So how do we, that's my opinion. There may be differences of opinion on the board, but this ordinance is crafted right now, in my opinion, says that you're starting off from a clean slate, and it's an undeveloped lot, and whatever you do triggers a calculation for the whole site. Am I wrong, Craig?
No, it says that.
It does say that.
It's conservative in that manner.
Right. I don't know that that's what we intended. If it is what we intended, somebody contradict me, but go ahead. Seth.
I don't want to say too much more because frankly, I'd rather hear the opinions of the board. I'll just say where it came from is, of course, concern from a lot of different people. I have to say, especially with pools, the neighbor getting a pool and then immediately having a drainage problem in their yard, which is a real issue, and we get complaints about it all the time. So that was one of the main factors. But also, any construction that we felt like, there was a new ordinance in regards to the major development, correct? And
Yep.
that
Yes.
was kind of the reaction to.
An update to the state mandated.
Right.
Language.
And then in reviewing that, we found that most projects that we see here, or that the construction office gets, would never reach that threshold.
Right.
So that they would have no stormwater requirements.
Right.
So this ordinance seems to pick up on those types of applications, and those are still creating nuisances throughout the city, but there's no requirements for them, and this ordinance is making requirements for them. Now, what I'm hearing is, like, what are the appropriate thresholds? And that's a policy decision. The various government agencies that I permit with have thresholds, and they're policy decisions. Do we design for the 100-year storm, the 50-year storm, the 25-year storm? Those are policy decisions. Each has implications with costs and, the size of the system, et cetera, and mitigation, but at the end of the day become policy. I understand your concern that 200 square feet is kind of arbitrary based on your lot size. So
Percentage, maybe?
could it be a percentage of coverage, of lot coverage? Those things could be incorporated. That could be a recommendation to the governing body. And I think Bill raised the issue is, okay, should we be treating, when you do, say if you're putting a shed, should we be treating it as a vacant land for calculating the amount of runoff?
What,
That's very conservative. I mean, so if you're going to do that, you're going to be responsible for all of the stormwater from your lot. I don't see a problem with that, but it's very conservative. So if you're worried about costs and impacts to developers or smaller type of development, then I can understand
I'm
that.
thinking more about homeowners who want.
Homeowners.
Right, like put a shed or a detached garage, and so you're now required to accommodate all of the runoff from your entire lot,
Correct.
is what this ordinance says.
what is the basis of, what has been the complaint that you've received? I mean, is it,
Yeah. I think it's, you have a lot of new construction coming in.
yeah,
And then what they do is they come in and then they build up the lot. Now everybody else in the neighborhood has runoff from that house.
okay.
So
Most
But that's new-
most of the tear
New
down.
construction.
and new
I would
construction.
say,
So tear down,
New
or
constructions
tear
are-
down and rebuild, or even new construction on vacant land, I agree, it just should be automatic.
right, 2 and 3, I think, address the general overall consent, majority of issues that I hear about.
Craig, I would just like to point out that one other threshold that I know that we already enforce within the city is once you improve your property by more than 50% of the equalized assessed value of the improvements, you have to come into compliance with the flood regulations. And now, so that winds up being you're only coming into compliance when you're already making a significant investment into the property. So that there's nothing that we're saying we couldn't do that type of a dollar amount threshold.
Well, the dollar amount's going to, 10 years from now, be,
The assessed value, and that's why it's tied to the assessed value, because as you equalize it, it's coming up to market value.
these added percentages Bob suggested.
Right.
Yeah, because I think we had a comment at the council meeting about somebody that lived in Village Green that said when you do 100 square feet, a smaller amount, that can affect the drainage in Village Green and what was being built there. So it does relate to the size of the property on how it affects the drainage.
Well, I will tell you that a lot of Village Green, there's some areas of Village Green that have drainage problems no matter what.
Yeah, I know.
The 1,000 block of Virginia Avenue, all down there, it was not filled properly. So no matter what you do, it's short of raising that whole block and filling it in. I mean, but, there's another situation, and I think I've mentioned this before, and in particular, it's a pretty excessive, where Ohio Avenue backs up to Cape May Avenue. Ohio Avenue was built back in the 50s, and it's all flat. Cape May Avenue, when it was developed with the fact that you had to basically grade the lot from the middle of the block to the street. Consequently, somebody from Ohio Avenue who was draining onto Cape May Avenue now has their own runoff, which they before were pouring on their neighbors. So there's also that element that comes into play, and some people are saying, well, he built a house, and now now it's all running off on my property. It's not really running off, it's just, they're not retaining their own. So
Yeah.
there's circumstances that you really aren't, we're not gonna cover all of it.
Right.
But you certainly don't want to penalize somebody who's going to put a garage in, or
Yeah.
put a driveway in. I mean, 200 square feet is just a parking spot. That's it.
When the condition wasn't created by their doing, it was by something else that
Right.
caused that
I
condition.
mean, if you, as I said, I went through each one of our properties, see how much square feet each of us has. And if I could go down and tell you what you have, how much, but it's, everybody's different. And I think a percentage or a dollar amount or equalization amount would probably cover where that threshold starts to some degree. I'm surprised swimming pools are an issue because to me, that swimming pool is a big retention basin.
I don't think, the swimming pool itself is not the issue, it's the
Probably
fact that they
grading.
keep them, they raise them up and then they grade away from them. And so it's those deck surfaces that the surrounds and the grading that meshes and grades back into the back of the property and sides of the property is discharging water to your adjoining neighbors.
So if somebody puts a pool in, they should be required to retain the runoff that's generated by the pool. If that.
Yeah, well, that's-
if I mean,
well, that's what
kinda
this says.
That's what we're getting here.
Right.
Would that apply to an above-ground pool or just a built-in pool? Because you can have an above-ground pool
How
as
you
big as a
grade it.
built-in.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah. Because they put decks around them and, even the above-ground
Do we
pool.
have any above-ground pools?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one on
Trying to
Vermont
think.
Avenue.
There aren't many
That's
of them,
out
are
from
there?
Well, I know one on Philadelphia.
Right next to her, there's
Two
Schweitzer's old house.
Yes, Schweitzer's old house.
Do you even need to get a permit for
Yes.
for an above-ground pool? Do you?
They consider it the same lot coverage as an in-the-ground pool.
Okay.
I mean, does everybody sort of agree that we should maybe kind of focus on I don't want to say the whole property, but the fringe, what's creating the problem by any new development, any new
I
addition?
kind of like, I like Lou's idea. If you're making an improvement, that's a certain percentage of the assessed value, did you say?
The equalized improvement value,
Okay.
equalized improvement value on the assessed, not the total, because you wouldn't put the land in there.
Of the
Of
building.
the building,
Of the building.
yeah.
So,
Tell you the issue I have with that is that if you're going to put in a driveway that's 100 feet long, you're not going to have any, it's not going to be a major assessment.
No. Say your house is equalized worth $100,000.
Okay.
So if you do, depending on what percentage you choose, I'll just use the flood example because it's already set. So that's set at 50%. So so if you did $50,000 worth of work, now you have to come into compliance with the regulations. So you're assessed at 100,000, equalized at 100,000. So that building's worth that much, 50 grand of an investment into a $100,000 building. You should be at the point where you're able to consider coming into compliance with the other regulations.
But when you're saying, though, about a driveway, right? Because I can see that affecting runoff, a driveway. that, they put a driveway, now it's higher than the person's next door, now they're getting all the runoff next door, but then they didn't have to comply with keeping their runoff. And 'cause
Well,
it's one of the-
maybe the percentage isn't 50%. That's just what they utilize in our flood regulations.
I'm just almost thinking that we have to look at what you're doing with that percentage increase
So,
in order to comply. Like, if you're putting on a second story, does that really make a difference with runoff?
Could.
if you're changing the angle of the roof, okay, and adding roof area, you're changing the rate at which it runs off and the amount of runoff, too, because you have more square footage on the roof, you know.
We actually look at it down as a plan.
As a
So,
plane
yeah,
plane
so
view?
Your
Plan
roof
view?
pitch doesn't really affect anything.
Okay, other than, it would affect the rate of runoff.
The time of concentration, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, for a roof, it's so small, it's so
It's,
minuscule that
okay.
you
So,
assume that it's.
if,
with a flat roof, you're gonna have runoff, somehow it's,
yeah,
unless it sits
Right.
there and rots the roof off.
so if you were to, that first, if you were, additions or renovations that requires a variance or waiver due to the setback requirements, lot coverage, or floor area ratio, or you increase the impervious area by a percentage, and I'm not sure what that percentage should be, or the floor area ratio by a percentage. In other words, if you don't need a variance for any of those things, but you're increasing your floor area of your house, it's kind of like the 200 square feet, but it's not, again, if you have a 10,000 square foot lot versus a 5,000 square foot lot, having a set square footage.
Remember, floor area ratio takes the volume. You could have floor
I'm
area
not-
ratio that's 2 stories and doesn't add that much.
Lot coverage lot coverage has a direct correlation to
Right.
stormwater design and calculation.
Right,
That, I would recommend that you use that
and not the
Threshold?
floor area?
Not floor area.
and not
Okay.
floor area ratio, no. But, so I think if you're increasing the coverage, then theoretically, you're going to have more runoff. So that has a direct relationship to stormwater and grading. So I think that would be, what that number is the policy decision. What's the appropriate number? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it,
Yeah.
that's the number to be debated.
Well, if you're going for a variance, to me, it should be automatic. Okay, in other words,
Right.
you've exceeded the lot coverage. But if you're still below it and I'm not sure what's,
That's
Yeah, and
where
it's-
the percentage comes in.
and it also differs in what zone you're in, too, because you have, like in Ohio, you have that area that's, I think it's still 30% lot coverage, and whereas the rest of the,
Some, it's
40.
40.
the rest is 40, but it's an area that's still
That's
30%.
the R1 zone, that's another,
Right.
that's another,
And that's something that never got fixed.
It did not.
It's in the master plan to fix that, but it never did.
correct.
So what I'm hearing is as part of A1, the additions to existing structures and/or site improvements which increase the impervious coverage by more than 200 square feet. That 200 square feet should be replaced by a percentage of lot coverage recommendation.
From an engineering perspective, I want.
And then the rest of that says, or any application requiring a variance for impervious coverage or lot coverage.
Right.
So that's fine. So I think it's just that 200 square foot is that threshold appropriate?
Yeah, I don't think it
There's
is.
not a relationship to lot size, but percentage of lot coverage, there is a relationship to your lot size.
So what,
I mean,
Just, if you want to use examples, let's say you did 10%. I'm just throwing a number out there. If you start with Dennis's house, Dennis's lot is 60 by 98, just under 6,000 square feet. So anything more than 600 square feet addition would trigger the having to.
600
make the
square
runoff
feet.
calculation.
I couldn't do that, because I'm already maxed out.
so you'd be going for variance anyway?
Right.
And would.
If you're going
and
for
it
variance, it would apply anyway. Let's take Zach's house. 68, well, I have you down as 808 Court. I know you own the one
Well,
next.
you're in a compact area
You've
there, so,
got, pardon me?
go ahead.
But I'm just.
Yeah, no, that's a good
So,
example.
your lot's 68 by 110, it's 70, just about 7,500 square feet, which is about what Mike has. So, sometimes, What's 5% of 775? I should know that off the top of my head.
350.
350 something.
Yeah, 350, so anything over 350 square feet would trigger having to accommodate the runoff from that addition. Bob, yours is 7,875 square feet, so you're about the same thing, 300 square feet. Stacy, you're
6,500.
you're 6,000 square feet, so so 300 square foot would trigger, you'd have to take care of that. That's not a major, big addition, but it's enough to, at least, I'm just throwing, that's 10%. But that's what you want to go with. Or then the alternative is, I didn't do the
10%
assessments.
of the
Of the lot-
actual
lot
lot
size.
size.
Yeah.
What percentage?
10%. That's the number I'm just throwing out.
I thought you said 5.
I'm sorry, I did say 5. I did say 5%. I did say 5%.
Mike's following.
10% may be a bit much. I mean, if you're talking about on a 6,000 square foot, you can do something 20 by 30, that's
Yeah.
the size of something that's impacting a neighbor. I mean,
That's significant.
that is.
That's probably getting you to a variance level almost for most houses, right?
Well, what's, Lou, let's do, that. If everybody's sort of understands that concept, why don't we compare
Well,
that
there's-
to Lou's suggestion about the equalization relative to your assessment. So what's a 2,000 square foot home assessed for, generally speaking?
New, old, near
Small
the
lot,
beach,
big
away from
lot.
the beach.
I mean, is an average assessment $300,000?
Let's just use 500. Use
400,000.
500.
Yeah, just use 500.
Use 500.
500,000.
Use 500.
That's just the building, Karen.
500,000 of
Most
the building.
expensive
Now,
things are things.
Yeah, so it would just be, if you chose what the flood set at 50%, you're just cutting it in half every time, so.
That's right, because the flood zone triggers.
so if it's 200, it's going to be $250,000. If whatever you're doing is $250,000,
what happens-
that would trigger it.
Right, that's if you chose 50%. It should probably be a lesser amount, because then you would never capture a driveway or a pool. You know, you might want to get down around 25%.
But if you spell out the pool and
100,000.
pool, garage, which I'd suggest we
Right,
keep
they're
that in there
already-
anyway.
already in
Driveway.
there.
They're already in there.
Specifically.
I think driveway should definitely be.
But driveways gets into the, not in the cost side, but in the.
Lot coverage?
The ratio that Bill brought up.
But here's the thing, what if you're not increasing anything in your house except you're putting a new kitchen and bathrooms in? Now you've hit that threshold, which Rich just said, you know, you're not adding on to the house, but you're improving the value of the property by.
And that's not what we're trying to do at all.
Okay, as long as we're clear, it's
Now,
not.
it says-
Right, but that would kick in.
It says additions to any existing structure, and then they have, that increases the lot coverage
Right.
by more than
Yeah, but we're
Right.
using-
200.
So I don't think,
But we're using-
even in that example, I don't think this would be triggered.
Yeah, like a high-end
Yeah.
kitchen renovation.
Right.
Yeah,
But if you do an addition, and in that addition, as most people do, they do the addition and they redo the part that it's attached to. What part is the addition and which part of the value is the addition versus what is just rehabbing the inside? I think you gotta keep this tied to the expansion of the lot
Yes,
coverage,
yeah.
because that is what affects
Exactly.
runoff.
Yeah.
If you're just trying to capture things so you can get a bunch of properties to fix their drainage, well, then do it a different way. But if you're really trying to address drainage, then you really got to tie it to things
Lot
that affect
coverage.
drainage. And your engineer has said on the record that the lot coverage is really what affects drainage the most. So if you want to have a rational basis for the law, then you probably should stick with.
I think it'll be a lot easier for our engineers and administration to calculate the issue
Yeah, it's just,
rather than staying out of
Yeah,
values
value.
and
it would be
things
part
like
of an application, the applicant has to
Right.
calculate.
Right.
Submit the application.
that. Right.
And,
I'm all for anything that takes me out of having to.
but I like the idea of an addition and, you know, the percentage,
Right.
rather than the cost. Because that could be within the same existing wall structure. The construction of a pool, I think, I would suggest that you specify both in-ground and above-ground pools.
that's the definition of pool? I mean, that's going to be in
I
the
think,
zone.
I think
If there-
a pool already
I
says,
think it already counts.
it already counts.
It doesn't.
Now, a
check.
garage would automatically be covered by this 5% number. You wouldn't have to specify, you wouldn't have to pull that out.
But I think I keep that in there though, Bill. Real clear.
Pardon me?
I think you ought to keep the garage in.
The word garage.
Of the
Word
garage.
garage.
Well, what if you're building an attached garage? Are you talking about a detached garage? Because
make any
it's gonna be
difference.
closer
Doesn't
to the
make any
property
It
line?
doesn't matter.
If you
Well, it
add,
does, it does. A detached garage could be 5 foot from the property line. If it's attached to your house,
It's still lot coverage, though.
that's what I'm saying, the garage should be just included in that lot coverage number. An attached garage, if it's attached to the house, has to honor bigger setbacks than the detached garage. And I think the detached garage is, am I wrong, correct, 5 foot on the side and 4 foot on the rear, or vice versa?
Detached,
Might be
it's
so.
5 and 4.
And if it's attached to the property, it can't be in the,
It's
can't be in the rear yard.
principal structure.
So it's got to be 30 feet from the rear yard? So if an attached garage has a different
different
calculation.
parameters, yeah.
But if you're keeping it at a lot coverage percentage, does it matter? If it's 5%?
It shouldn't matter, no.
So I think where we're at is what percentage number are people comfortable with? Is it 5%? Is it more or less?
So if you take my property, 7,500 square feet is my
Right,
lot,
right.
and I added on a garage, which was 528 square feet. If you use 500, that means it was 375 square feet. So I would have to, so I'm over and above that, so I'd have to
You would
do
have to provide
a drainage system.
for the garage.
For the garage,
Not for the entire site.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's plain numbers, and
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but
Well, that's what's causing the issue, is any new construction, it seems to be.
Yeah.
I mean, good luck in the middle of town, we got those houses that are already covering 80% of the lots.
But I think it comes down to what's happening is, when people put in these garages, they're putting the drainage into facing the neighbor's yard underground, and that's what they're doing, so they're flooding the neighbors, and I think that's where
And that's where the complaints are
the
coming.
complaints are coming from.
Yeah, there's either no gutters, it's just sheet runoff right into the
Or
neighbors,
they-
like 5 feet away from the
Yeah.
property line, and then just running into their yard.
Or they're putting them underground, and
Or they're guttering it and channeling it and concentrating the water at one discharge point, and that's going into the yard. I mean, we've seen both those situations.
And I think it really comes down to be honest with you, I want to defend the homeowners. I don't think it's the homeowners. I think it's a lot of these builders that are doing it to make it easy on themselves.
Well, there's no requirements for them. They
And I
can
don't,
just do
'cause I
what
don't
they
think
want.
homeowners out to flood their neighbor's yard.
No, they're not.
It's just what, you know,
Yeah. And then all we can do is listen to the complaint.
Misunderstanding. If someone has a house and that property happens to be graded in a terrible way, it's on a complete angle and it sends all the water to the neighbor, okay? It doesn't hold its water, it's bad. And someone puts an addition on that exceeds whatever parameters is set here tonight, 5%, 7%, whatever it is. When you look at that application, and now it's been triggered, it's over the, whatever that percentage they assign, are you fixing the whole site, or are you just addressing the new runoff from the garage? Because I think
Well,
this-
so,
This says
so
the
that's
whole
what
site.
Bill brought up. This says you treat the lot like it's vacant, and you're treating all of the stormwater runoff.
isn't that what you want to do? Like, why wouldn't you try to fix a property?
What's that? Why would, you say that
Why wouldn't
again?
you want to try to fix the whole property? And how would you
That's-
fix just the garage?
I mean, I agree. I mean, if you want, that's a very conservative approach to this, is like, okay, if you're going to make these improvements, you're going to start accommodating all the stormwater runoff from your property. Wow. That's what this ordinance is doing.
That's a bit onerous to me.
That could be, and that could be onerous.
And I have no idea, I just want to, I mean, I'm not an engineer, I don't know how you would do that from an engineering standpoint.
Well, you're digging up all,
Underground
No, no,
storage.
what I'm saying is,
That's what Bill was
if
bringing
you're
up.
making them accommodate the addition, how do you do that? You put like a drainage thing equal to 200 square feet or whatever, and the rest of the property just
Well, but can't,
continues to be a problem?
but can't this new ordinance let the homeowner that's being flooded take issue with the person of the house that's flooding
Yes.
them? That's what it comes down to. So,
The squeaky wheel, but that's not a great engineering policy.
No,
I mean,
that's
if
the
you're trying to
state.
fix the drainage in your town, then, no, it's okay. You have to decide what you're trying to do here. Are you trying to say that we want to make sure that no new additions make the situation worse? Or are you trying to say we want to use this as an opportunity, like Craig does when someone comes in for a variance, to improve the drainage of the lots in your town? So if you're going to make a substantial improvement, we're going to use that as an opportunity to make your lot be properly drained.
And that's
what Craig
what
does
this
right.
ordinance is doing now.
But let's go back.
That's what this is
let's
trying
go
to do.
back to what raises to begin with. It's not the older houses in town that probably drain onto each other's properties. It's primarily east of Madison Avenue. The houses are being torn down. Lou, am I wrong?
There's a handful in the old section of town, but it's caused by new construction.
Right, new construction. This has, you've got a lot of older houses in town. You start requiring them to do something, you want to put, if some of those lots aren't very big, and if they want to put a shed in or something that hits that threshold, that's,
And, yeah, and the cost of doing that could
and
be,
that's not really,
4 or
that's
5
not what's
times
brought
the
this thing to a head.
That's okay. I was just pointing out what this thing actually says and what your policy objective is, and then
Right.
I have no
Right.
opinion. I live in a.
Mr.
I live in a
Chairman,
second floor.
what's the smallest lot? I mean, just so I know, at 5%, what's typically the smallest lot in town?
like a Village Green twin
Yeah.
or quad.
Twins 6,000 square feet, quads.
You could have a 40, you could have a 40 by 100 lot, Bill.
There's a few.
Let's say 4,000 square feet.
The average small lot in town is probably between 4,000 and 5,000 square
That's
feet.
for all 4 pieces. So 4,000 times 5%.
A quad is 3,100 square feet.
5,000 square feet, is 250
Yes,
feet.
Yes, yes.
and what
So
do you say?
your
quad-
smallest lots, essentially,
quad is
5,000,
3,100 square feet.
5%.
Would be
If
250.
that's what you're trying to establish, what is the appropriate percentage, it's very close to 5%.
I'm just saying if it is 5%, the smallest amount typically is going to be about 250 square feet.
I just want to put one more thing out. I'm trying to stay out of this, but I just want to make sure we're kind of thinking
You have a hard time
straight.
doing
Well, it is, because I live here too. What I'm saying is this, if, it doesn't matter what the percentage is, because in theory, any addition you make, you should accommodate that addition for drainage, so as not to make it worse. So the threshold concept was a threshold to set that if you exceeded it, it was appropriate to then fix the drainage on your property entirely. If what you're doing now is, we're just saying that you have to address the drainage on your addition, the threshold becomes much less relevant. Because if you're only doing a 10-foot by 10-foot addition, the amount of drainage you have to control is 100 square feet. It's a little hole in the
A
ground.
rain barrel would
So,
fix
so
that.
that's why I'm saying you've mixed apples and oranges. The threshold is important if it's a threshold that makes them do their whole property. If it's not going to make them do their whole property, but only the addition they make, then the threshold isn't that critical, because the amount of work that they have to do is direct relation to the size of the addition. So accommodating 100 square feet of drainage is nothing. 200 is a little bit more. 600 is a lot more. So it's self-adjusting. So I'm just pointing out that the reason we had the threshold was because this thing was capturing a whole bunch of properties and making you fix the whole property. So that, I'm just pointing that, where you go from there.
Yeah,
is up
I haven't
to you.
heard any change to that, because right now, it says all proposed sites must be designed so that the total stormwater runoff from the site is no greater than the runoff generated in its pre-developed
Right.
vacant state.
Right.
So that's saying you're now capturing everything as,
Right. That's what it was at the last meeting, and then I was
That's
the one
what
who
it's
brought
still-
up,
that's-
wait a minute, you're gonna make every addition have fixed their entire property. Shouldn't there be a threshold? So then, and then I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, there should be a threshold. So then they came
Right.
back with a threshold, because you don't wanna make every property be entirely regraded, if they're doing a small thing. So that's the point of the threshold.
And
So
that was
If you're
the-
gonna abandon that concept, then the whole thing is lost.
And that was the
Let me-
concern
can I
I
add
brought
one
up
thing?
at the last meeting, was you put in a $2,000 shed that potentially, that could cost you $10,000 to $15,000 in drainage improvements.
But a 10 by 10 shed is not going to create a huge drainage cost to fix.
No,
But you may not have a drainage problem to begin with.
Correct.
So if you don't have a drainage problem to begin with.
This will make sure you don't have a worse one, or you have none. That's all. I
But
just-
wait, but let me, just so I understand, a 10 by 10 shed, 100 feet, isn't going to be 5% of anything, if we're talking 5%. I mean, like, the example I was trying to say is,
Yeah.
like, our smallest lots in town are 5,000 square feet. So at 5%, and again, that's just the number we've thrown out there, would be 250.
Two-
So you're beyond a shed at that point.
But you're a little bit bigger than a parking space,
Right, yeah.
so it's not a whole lot of area.
What's involved? If it's 250 feet, what's involved in terms of controlling drainage of a 250 square foot structure? What
What's
is that?
involved?
Yeah, there's like
Like
pipe,
approximately how much
Yeah.
storage? It's a pipe and stone trench.
that's how
So-
big.
Gutters,
It's around the perimeter.
yeah,
That's it.
pipe and stone trench.
what is it? I'm sorry, Craig, I didn't hear you.
Pipe and stone trench, you know, the
Okay,
flexible pipe you would get at Home Depot? You put that in stone trench, and
Eh.
it's probably gonna run down the side of your property line and have a dish, the inlets at both ends, and the inlet at the street side should be lower, so that when the system fills up, it discharges to the street instead of the back of the property. That's the typical system that we can improve.
As opposed to if you have to do the whole entire site, it's drainage, pipe and drainage on
both sides
both
of-
sides of the property, and you may have to.
And probably
you may
some
have
in
to
the rear.
grade
Yeah,
property
100
for
feet on
street.
each side or
And that's not a minor undertaking.
Well, if you start doing the whole property too, you're just pushing it until the whole block's done, it's not gonna be right. Because the water's, if you're higher than everybody else, it's just gonna keep running off till everybody's in the right grade, right?
Yeah, they're
Well, you're,
going-
no, you're capturing your runoff. I mean, so theoretically, you're not discharging any more runoff off-site.
But if you make your backyard higher than your front yard, and your neighbor might not be the same elevation,
Right.
so until the whole block's done, it's not gonna be right.
Well, this has provisions for like curbs and retaining walls to make sure that you're not impacting your neighbors.
Isn't there something in here about you can't discharge to an adjoining property?
Yes, there is. There's language in
saw
there.
that. somewhere.
But it also says to grade it towards the street. I'll tell you something else that didn't make sense. Well, I don't want to.
No water shall be directed to run onto an adjacent property. Techniques such as raised driveway edges, low curbing, or other similar methods shall be employed to direct water off-site or to recharge areas.
Bill, let me ask a question. This proposal deals with construction going forward.
Correct.
This issue was raised by people complaining about what's going on in their neighborhoods. What does this recommendation do to solve those problems?
I understand it doesn't.
The public nuisance condition, subsection C at the end, very last section of this. And that says, "The city zoning officer and code enforcement officer shall have the authority to enforce that section," which says if you're discharging or affecting someone else's property.
So somebody else who complained a year ago has an access to a grievance procedure.
Yes, that's what this says.
No?
Subsection C.
So we can retroactively examine conditions that caused the council to adopt this ordinance.
Well, this came from the state, right, this one?
This ordinance, no. This is
Oh.
your own ordinance. You can do whatever you want with this. There's no control.
So you-
There's no state pointing a gun at your head and saying you have to adopt this.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
so
thought there was
council-
one that had to do with runoff that we,
Council
That
gets
was the last one
empowered
we
with
adopted. That's
this.
a major development.
okay.
Council's empowered by this ordinance to address the concerns of the people who raised the problem that created this ordinance.
Right.
That's something I think is important. So Craig, somehow you're going to, say you add a 10 by 30 addition to your house, and it's over the threshold. So somewhere along the line, you're going to have to correct that drainage on wherever that is on your house, whether it be with a pipe, drainage pipe or whatever, to keep it on your site.
Right.
I mean, to me, that's the most trickiest part of this whole thing, is when you do an addition. All the other stuff is pretty clear. You add a garage, Yeah, you're gonna, the design is pretty easy to fix that. I mean, you're just gonna have to do it, or even a driveway. Driveways are gonna be, pretty much everybody's gonna be over when you do a driveway. I'm convinced of that. You're gonna have your threshold, you add a driveway, you're gonna be impacted by this. So you're gonna have to make sure that your driveway fits the bill, doesn't drain off.
Unless they use pavers, which
Well, it doesn't make,
So if you,
Or-
so if, there's the lot coverage comes into question, is if you use lot coverage, we have a provision in the residential districts that gives you credit for using pervious driveway material. So, you know, that gives you, it
Actually,
promotes,
it's
that
an
promotes
ins-
the
it's
use
an
of-
incentive.
Incentivizes using pavers, stone, clamshells, et cetera.
using that math, if I added my driveway that I added, using the 5%, and it's I mean, it's 50% coverage, I still would have had to have corrected the drainage, which I don't have a problem with. I mean, really, that's not a bad thing to do. 5%'s looking better and better, Bill, I think.
And the 25-year storm, I mean, that's an engineering
It's
standard.
6.7 inches for the 24-hour storm, I think it is.
So is everybody okay with that 5%
Yeah.
threshold?
I think it makes sense.
I think we have to put in clear language to explain it to the rest of council why you chose the 5%.
And the sentences about it being considered vacant for pre-development parameters, I think that confuses it.
Well, I think you're tying the threshold to the lot coverage, which is a calculation based on the size of your lot.
Right.
So instead of just arbitrarily enforcing 200 square feet to a huge lot means nothing, and 200 square feet to a small lot means a lot more. So if you take a lot coverage aspect, attack at it, everyone's treated the same.
And it's two-dimensional rather than what you're putting there.
Right.
Simply,
And the drainage area you're talking about, what you have to fix is what you've built that impact. You build a driveway, that's all you have to worry about is how it's impacting the driveway part of it, correct?
Not the way
what
it's
this
That's
written.
not what this says.
That's not what this, that's the big change you're all
No,
making.
that's not what it says.
This says that you have to address, if you go over this threshold, that means you're gonna have to address the stormwater from your lot.
So if you take the language out, the lot's considered vacant for pre-development.
No.
So what it could do is discourage people from putting in that
yeah,
pool,
5% of the
perhaps.
lot's a lot bigger than.
You don't want that either.
Could you make a percentage based on lot sizes?
It is.
I mean, like a whole formula, it's not just a 5%.
5%,
5% for me is a lot different than 5% for you.
But it makes it puts everybody on an equal footing. I mean, if you said a bigger lot can have more coverage, then you're sort of defeating the purpose of, they're already allowed to put something bigger on. I think the question that I'm hearing is that the addition has to be accommodated and not treating the entire lot as if it was vacant when you hit that threshold. And if there's an issue, there's language in here that neighbors can have recourse to go back beyond that.
Yeah, so
I'm on board with that, I'm on board with that.
You're asking that subsection 5
Yeah.
on page 3 of this, which says,
Okay, go ahead.
all proposed sites shall be designed so that stormwater runoff from the site is no greater than the runoff generated in its pre-developed state.
If you take vacant
If
out.
you take vacant out,
Right.
so then you're comparing, post-development is with the addition, pre-development is the existing house.
Yes.
So if you strike vacant from that,
Correct.
that would do that. And you would also have to, 5A1 says all lots shall be considered vacant for pre-development parameters. So
That should be.
those would be the two things that you would recommend changing if you're looking to not require everyone to address all of the stormwater coming off their lot.
before we decide to change that, that language seems to me, if you take the word vacant out of it, then you could have a house, a building on a piece of property that's already causing a problem. And if you add to it, it's going to cause more of a problem. But by taking the word vacant out, you're basically authorizing the initial problem.
Well, that's what the nuisance thing is for. You have no, right now,
Yeah,
there's,
but why create a bigger problem?
no, what you're doing is you're saying anything
Well,
that's
that's-
added to that, it has
Now,
to be
he-
taken care of.
He's got a point. So if you look at the nuisance part of it, the nuisance says, okay, if someone says you're causing a nuisance stormwater issue to my property, then the rest of this ordinance applies. Well, if they, what do they change? And then what are they supposed to design to if they're going to remedy that situation? It has to be treated as vacant, I would think.
Well, you should have to
Yes,
beef up that
it does.
nuisance part of it then.
So that's,
If you
so
don't,
I mean,
if you
You
don't do
guys are trying to
that,
legislate.
then you're
200
perpetuating
years
the problem.
Of case law with the people's water affecting the adjacent land. That's treacherous ground. I'll leave that to Mr. Gillis for us to figure out.
Wait a minute, this is like a tennis match. How many times is this thing going to get bounced over
Well,
the
what you're
net?
supposed to be doing is reviewing it for consistency with the master plan, but, you know,
I think these are good suggestions, though.
you're the
I don't
planning
want-
expert, so it's nothing wrong with commenting on it. It's just ultimately, it's a policy decision.
But you have something in here that a minimum of 30% of the estimated runoff should be provided on site. Is that something that would apply in a,
So you-
in a nuisance complaint?
yes. So what this ordinance is asking you to do is accommodate 30% of that 25-year design storm for your runoff.
If it's for the, well,
That's what the ordinance is asking you to do.
Is 25 the same standard for major development, a 25-year storm?
For major, you design for the 210 and 100-year storm.
Okay.
so let's go back. If you take out the vacant, and take out treating it as a vacant piece of property, and somebody comes in and says, my neighbor's a nuisance, okay? It's up to, who's it up to? You to determine whether it's a nuisance or not, Craig?
No. So it says the city zoning officer and code enforcement officer shall have the authority to enforce the nuisance, public nuisance condition.
And if they, if
So
they
if-
determine it.
once they flag it,
Okay.
and that homeowner has to remedy this, then they would submit a stormwater design that's designed to address
30% of
the previous subsections or, general requirements and
Yeah,
subsections.
But I would argue, if I were the person who wants to make this addition, I would argue, if you told me that your ordinance basically legitimized my excess. But because you've said everything above my present condition. My present condition is already too bad, but your ordinance says that's the threshold.
That's the threshold if you're adding something. Even if you're not doing anything,
Well-
even if you're not doing anything, the nuisance, public nuisance part.
Correct, but when you.
Either way,
But when you take the word vacant out, you're basically,
No, because under the public nuisance clause, what you're doing is you're invoking the criteria of a certain threshold of rain and what the mitigation is supposed to be for that. Has nothing to do with the,
and I would argue, if that were me, I would argue,
It
wait a
says go-
minute.
The nuisance section says, go right to subsection B, skip over A, go right to B, general requirements, because it's citing, if they comply with the procedure set forth in 52591B. So they're not sending you to the threshold part, they're sending you right to the requirements.
right.
what the mitigation is.
Okay. If you say so.
That's what it says.
That's what it says.
That's what it
All right.
says.
That part does make sense, actually.
I don't want to be there in the zoning office.
Yeah, so it sounds like you guys are comfortable with dealing with all these complaints, but there doesn't, I mean, in order for someone to complain under that public nuisance, I mean, can anyone come in and just make a complaint? And then what happens to the person they're complaining about? Do they have to come in, pay the application fee, pay for the work that's done? I'm just not sure.
Yeah, normally, I mean, we take complaints for anything from anybody at all times. And if they came in complaining under this, then the zoning officer or code enforcement would go out and see if the situation actually exists. If it exists, that would trigger them to have to submit a stormwater runoff plan. And then we would submit that to an engineer to review, to make sure that it is accomplishing what it's supposed to accomplish within this ordinance. Then they would have to fix it.
Is there a process for them to appeal the complaint?
I do not see one in
There
here.
always is one. It's an appeal from an administrative officer, so it's,
Okay.
Who's that?
there is a way to do that.
By that, I mean,
so
someone
within
who's
this
a
or-
habitual complainer about everything.
Yeah, well, there's-
There are people like that.
Really?
So within this
Yeah, I got
ordinance,
one.
within this ordinance, is if somebody complains, this section B is what would guide
Yeah.
the city and their,
Gives them, that's how they remedy.
correct.
That's the remedy, yeah.
I have another question. Why would you not, if there are, in here it says that runoff would not be directed towards existing water bodies or wetlands areas, why would you not direct runoff to those areas that filter it, that
Unclean water, it's silting up a water body, you don't ever want to do that.
Excess fertilizer going into the water
I
body,
know.
could be any number of things.
I imagine the Madison Avenue Pond gets a lot of excess water.
Like discharge to Cape Island Creek, you certainly don't want that situation to occur.
So, is everybody comfortable where we are right now? Greg, you got direction?
So we have, the one correction or recommendation, whenever you make these recommendations, city council doesn't have to listen to you.
Right.
So the recommendation is to change the 200 square foot threshold to 5%.
5% lot coverage.
Lot coverage, 5% lot coverage. Were there any others?
I think in addition to the swimming pool and the garage, you probably would want to add a driveway.
Driveways.
There's a huge change.
Okay,
No, Craig, there is one other. We're, I think there,
We're not done yet.
oh, I thought you said were there any
No,
others?
no,
I'm
no,
sorry, I
thank you.
thought we were leaving out.
We're adding I think, from what I
I
gather,
think-
driveway to the pool and
Yeah,
garage.
and eliminate vacant.
Eliminate vacant, eliminate,
now, so, okay, so that's a huge policy decision,
okay?
is the elimination of the vacant.
I wouldn't
Okay.
phrase it
Listen,
as
I wouldn't want,
eliminating
if I added on a garage, I don't think I ought to have to fix everything for my whole lot. I mean, if I know, I just have to put a little drainage area around my runoff of my garage. I don't have to go and go on each side of my lot, an extra 150 feet worth of stuff to do. I wouldn't want to do that. And I'm
But suppose those portions that you don't want to do anything to are already causing a historic
The
problem.
nuisance comes in.
nuisance covers
The nuisance comes in, and
Alright.
there's a formula for that.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, I know what you're saying. If I were a person.
Then you're
who-
just going back to any permit. Really,
Well,
almost.
yeah, but that's, yeah.
And then you don't want that either.
And the focus of this really was on the tear downs, new construction, the things that are really
Oh, no, the purpose of it was to stop erosion from draining into other people's properties.
I don't think it's for the entire
But you
city
also-
to be regraded.
Well, wait, but this will prevent, you know, I was with you until Mike started talking, and then now it makes a lot of sense to me. Because if you don't have a drainage problem, if one doesn't exist, then you shouldn't have to go through the whole calculation. Let's just deal with the little thing that you're doing and make sure it doesn't cause a problem where there isn't a problem.
Right.
If you have that historic problem, then when you go to put a garage in, the person that you're flooding is going to come into City Hall and say, no, there's a problem on this property, you need to do the whole thing. And then we're going to skip to B, and we're, or not B,
No,
yeah.
the other one, yeah,
And we're going to do the whole thing.
okay.
Even if you're not putting a garage or doing anything, your neighbor can.
Right, they could still,
can
for
complain.
at any time, but
Right.
even in that scenario, like,
Right.
then that allows us to not have to put
Now,
the little garage through the
we've
ramp.
just,
Can I give an example? With my house, when I put my house in, I was required to put in a drainage system. So my drain spouts run to the front, and I have a stone and everything, and then my French drain, but then I also, because of the fact I'm on clay, right, so nothing goes any deeper, that my concrete guy put in a pipe that drains further out, so that I can get water to drain part of the other property. So if I put it in a garage, there'd be no need for me to do the rest of it, because it's already been completed. That's where I was going with
Right,
that.
all we would want to do is make sure that the
That the
garage you're
new
putting in isn't going to cause.
Construction, if I put a garage in, that had drainage, proper drainage, so that I wasn't flooding my neighbors with the new
assuming that this, everybody's almost in agreement now with this thing, just stand back, and are we telling people, are we discouraging people for progress in this town as far as building, but with this ordinance? I mean, are we discouraging people to add an addition because of what we just decided?
I don't think you will.
I think so.
I think you would if you said the entire site has to be.
And I agree with that. That's why I'm just looking at the bigger picture here. Are we really doing the right thing here by people that want to add a pool? Do they want to add a driveway? Are we going to make it so hard for them that they're not going to want to improve their property? We don't want to do that either.
Well, to me, there's even conditions where you do the addition and nothing needs to be done because the existing condition of the property drains right to the street, which is what you're trying to do anyway.
But it's not so much grading, though, it's where those drain spouts are going to
Right.
shoot that water to.
And I think we're also saying to somebody who wants to build an addition, you can build an addition, but we don't want you to cause a problem for the rest of us by building your addition.
Well, I understand that. I get that.
Yeah.
If that's the message to somebody who wants to expand his property, so be it.
Right.
We've got a larger mission here.
Right.
I think it just makes, it keeps neighbors friendlier, that you're not, building something then flooding them. It keeps the peace, I would say, better.
Okay, great.
Is there a consensus that I'm removing the vacant clause?
I think that's the consensus.
Yes.
Is that yes?
Yes.
I'm hearing everyone yes, yes,
yes.
yes?
And
Okay.
sentence number one.
It's like it's like any resolution. If it doesn't work out, you change it.
I have,
We don't write these in
I
stone.
want to make sure that
You're add-
everyone knows what that vacant thing does.
And you're
So,
adding,
like,
you're
that's
adding
a
driveway.
big departure from the
yes, you put
ordinance,
the word
so,
driveway.
okay.
Let council haggle it out again then, if they want.
Well, it's helpful that two council members are here and have,
Probably when they talk about it next time. Oh, I might be there when they talk about it.
And carefully hidden behind Greg's comment was, it can go both ways. It could be a solving of a problem, it could be solving another problem.
there's always, what's it called?
You can always tweak it.
Should we put that in the ordinance?
Yeah, can we put Lou's phone number in the ordinance?
No, Craig's.
They call me anyway, so. I've had to tell a lot of people that I can't help them.
Anything can go wrong.
Okay, so everybody, I guess we should vote on that?
Okay.
A
So there-
motion first?
I'll make the motion.
And I have just,
As-
if I can summarize the changes that I have is, one, add driveways to the threshold section, the scope and threshold. The 200 square foot threshold is recommended to be revised to 5% of lot coverage increase. And the final thing is, in subsection 5, is to change the language, considering all lots to be considered vacant for pre-development parameters. So that should be the difference between the pre and the post, pre-existing versus the post-development.
Okay, so you, yep. Bob, you made a motion?
Yes, make the motion.
I'll second.
I'm sorry, who was the second?
Mike?
Mike. Thank you. Motion by Mr. Gorgon, seconded by Mr. Jones. Mr. Belasco?
Yes.
Mr. Gorgon?
Yes.
Mayor Malik?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Sheehan?
Yes.
Mrs. Reed?
Yes.
Mr. Crowley?
Yes?
Mr. Lundholm?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Becerra?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, before we adjourn, I was actually had a conversation with Dennis earlier this week, and I know there's a lot of times we've had agenda or work sessions that we've canceled and so forth, and there are some things I think we have to start considering in the town. There's some things that are in the master plan that we didn't move on. We should be kind of revisiting those. I think a major area we need to somehow tackle and come up with some creative ideas is affordable housing in terms of not COA housing, but employee housing, young family housing, just to try and brainstorm, because we're losing that element, and we need it. I mean, everybody needs help to stay in business, and we certainly want to try and get young families coming into town. So we'll be having just some more, I want to say, roundtable meetings, and I would suggest anybody has any topics they want to discuss, email me, and we'll throw them on. Okay?
Great.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Just one thing.
Of course.
To follow. I was trying to agree with you, but now I won't say it. But after our conversation, I went back to the master plan and pulled out the pieces that talk about affordable housing, and I put it down on a 3-page sheet with a demographic analysis of the population trends for the last 30 years in town. And if it's all right with you, could I send this to the committee members just as some way of beginning a
Sure,
dialogue?
Sure.
So I'll pass it over.
You obviously spent some time on it.
Yeah, all right.
Bill, oh, sorry.
I can send it over.
Send it to
Email,
me.
email to.
Yeah,
Karen, she'll send it.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you say affordable housing, that doesn't solve our COA type of housing,
talking
correct?
about COA.
I know, but I mean, our low-income housing, right? That doesn't solve that issue on how many housing that the city has to build within a certain amount of
Well, the
years.
city
We
doesn't
have
have to
another
build it.
round coming in 2025, so.
Yeah, and I believe what Bill was talking about is that threshold when you get beyond the income limits of COA.
The workforce housing, I think.
Right, but I'm just saying it doesn't take into consideration solving our issue with the low-income housing.
We don't technically have to provide it.
What is-
It's
What is the,
Well-
when you say issue,
Well, I know when,
mean our
we all
unma-
collect COA money, right,
Okay.
to do the low-income housing, because we don't have enough housing, that's why they're collecting the money. because-
Affordable housing.
Affordable
Yeah.
housing, okay.
Yeah.
So that's,
That we have an unmet need of 12, I think. So we have an unmet need of 12. In our last round, we came to a agreement with Fair Share Housing that we would try to meet that unmet need through the accessory apartment program.
Right.
And that is in our zoning and is sat there. We have yet to have one built. And I suspect when we get into our next round, we'll be having a discussion about the accessory apartment program. But right now, that's been what's been instituted to try and address those 12 units that were deficient through their calculations. There's other avenues that could be explored, but that has to deal with COA. You know, what a lot of people find out is that the need after that income limit, after you exceed that income limit, is just as great as it is below it. And that's where the policies that are set forth from the planning board and the council could really start to address some of the issues that have resulted in basically a depopulation of Cape May County and southern Cape May County especially. Currently, I sit on a affordable housing task force with the county chamber. Ty Menz is also sits on those, and it's trying to be addressed all around. We have members of our Coast Guard base that are mostly living in Atlantic County because that's where they can find housing. So it's definitely an issue that is pressing and needs to be addressed, and it's acute in the city of Cape May, but in Cape May County overall.
And its impact is in the demographics of the middle income, family of four, two kids, parents, ages 35, 25, 35, 40. Those numbers are cratering. 60% drops in the last 15 years. And it's a huge, huge depression in the middle of our demographic pattern. The only element of the demographic that's growing are people over 70.
Yeah. And finding a rental is
It's impossible.
almost impossible. I have a 27-year-old brother, he can't even find an apartment.
And not to go on, but the other thing about rentals is the new census data came out, and about as many housing units are occupied by owners as are occupied by renters in town. But the renter occupied are some extremely high-income people. So this isn't an economic issue as much as it's a lifestyle choice issue. The people who are renting properties and the income levels between $500,000 and $1 million a year is about half of our renting.
They're not renting them year-round,
But they qualify as renters.
but they're not year-round residents. And
Right.
We're talking about year-round.
No, these are year-round rentals. The Census Bureau numbers, residents of the community are living in rental units, and their incomes are between $500,000 and $1 million.
They're living in units that they own, which are rental units. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, they're
They're not tenants. They're not tenants.
They're renting. They're renting. The Census Bureau counts them as residents who are renting.
I would want you to show me 10
will.
people that do that in town.
Oh, I don't know who they are, but there's a lot of them.
Year-round, that are spending that kind of money.
I'm sorry.
Well, I guess it's
just-
the criteria that you have to question.
One of the other issues, it's not one we're going to fix, but it is a real one in regards to like public housing and any expansion is there, what's kind of crazy is you would think that the qualifications for the highest income you could make to still live in public housing might be tied to the minimum wage or something like that. It's not. And as wages have increased significantly over the last few years, the maximum income to be in public housing has not. And that actually can hurt families in Cape May who work. You know, they're working families that were in low-income housing, public housing, no longer would qualify for public housing. So it's kind of crazy.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Who owns the housing authority? Who owns that? Who?
You want to try to explain that?
The Cape May Housing Authority.
That, you know what? Maybe that's that's for a different night when we have.
Yeah.
There's
But
different,
I think
It is.
your point is well taken, Chairman, that we need to have more of these roundtable discussions to kind of feather out some of these issues and see if we can find solutions.
We may have to pressure other bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't be the only town that's got this.
No, it's the entire county.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
2025, year-round.
Do we have a motion to adjourn then?
Everybody have a
Seconded.
happy Christmas and a happy New Year. Happy holidays, I guess. One of you.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Yeah, because there's different bodies with different roles, and you effectively gutted the ordinance. That was pretty impressive. I mean, it was.